Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Git and working with remote repositories. To start, I want to consider a situation, the state of a repository after you git clone it. When you git clone a remote repository and cd into your local clone, a lot of things are automagically set up for you. Namely, git pull and git push both sort of work out of the box. That is to say that in this initial post-git clone state, using git pull and git push without any options or arguments will work in a very intuitive way. Before I go any further, let me demonstrate what I mean. I have this repository on GitHub called remote test repo 0. I'm going to create a local clone of this repository, and then I'm going to test the default behavior of git push and git pull. So first, let me make a local clone of this remote repository. I'll grab the URL, do git clone. We'll cd into it. And then we're going to test git push first. So I'm going to create a file, commit it, and then do git push and just see by default what the behavior is. Okay, so we created the file and then we committed it. Now let's just do a git push, again without any options or arguments or any configuration, and we'll just see what the default behavior is. Okay, so it looks like it did something successfully. I'm guessing that it pushed the commit to the origin repository, this one on my GitHub. To check that, let's refresh. And yeah, you can see that file1.txt is here, kind of like we pretty much all expected. Let's try it the other way around. Let's try to do a git pull and see what the default behavior is. To do that, I'm going to create a new file in the remote repository using GitHub's direct feature. And we'll call this one file2.txt. Okay, it looks like it was created and we committed it. Let's do a git pull on the local side and see what happens. Again, like we probably all predicted, the commit was pulled into our local repository and file2 is here. And so this is what I mean when I say that git push and git pull work out of the box. It was very intuitive and very easy. It was a very good default behavior. Today, for educational purposes, we're going to reproduce this behavior manually. We're going to manually configure all of the settings required to have this intuitive behavior. And in doing this, my main hope is that I can teach you some things about Git that you didn't already know, and maybe I can open your eyes to the workflows and techniques that are possible with these commands, such as pushing to a branch of a different name, pulling from a branch with a different name, pulling from one branch and pushing to another, pushing to multiple branches. The list goes on and on. I won't go into those, but I think that after you see some of the commands and configurations in this video, you might have an idea of how to do those things. And my other hope is that you might appreciate the intuitive behavior that Git provides out of the box. Git is known for being a kind of complicated thing, especially for beginners, so wherever it can provide simple, intuitive behavior is a win because it helps beginners ease their way into using Git. And Git now is a very widespread, ubiquitous tool and an important one, so anything that helps beginners start using Git, I think, is important. So without further delay, let's get started. The main reason why git pull and git push work out of the box is that git clone automatically sets up tracking for the default branch. I have another repository on GitHub called remote test repo. I have it right here. But we can't just git clone it because, like I said, the default branch will automatically track its remote counterpart. To get around this, we're going to create a local repo and then manually connect it to this remote one and not using the automatic settings. So I'm going to return to my home directory. I'm going to make a directory called local test repo, and we'll cd in there, git init, and we're going to add remote test repo as a remote reference or remote repository for this new local one. I'll call it my remote. Okay. Now that we have this remote repository configured, let's try fetching the data from it. Okay, so it didn't work. Why? Well, let's take a look at the man page for git fetch. So right here. When no remote is specified, by default, the origin branch or the origin remote will be used unless there's an upstream branch configured for the current branch. So I knew this was going to happen. Kind of fooled you guys, but this is one of the defaults that I wanted to illustrate. When you git clone something, it will configure the remote branch, the remote repository that you used for cloning. It'll configure that one as the origin remote repo. And when you configure a remote repo as being the origin one, a lot of defaults work just out of the box immediately and intuitively. So I kind of tricked us into doing this or running into this obstacle so that I could illustrate that point. So now that we know that we need to specify the remote repository, let's try git fetch again. But this time we're going to specify to pull or to fetch from my remote. Okay, so that worked. So the next thing to do is to get a local copy of my remote's master branch, the one right here, on this local machine. Currently, I don't have it. If I say git branch, nothing happens. We need to get it here. Typically, I do a git checkout master, but the problem with doing that for our purposes is that it's not going to, or it's going to automatically track the remote counterpart, the one right here. And of course, it's a nice intuitive behavior, but for the purpose of learning Git and some of the underlying mechanisms, that's not what we want. We want it to do that manually. So we can't just git checkout master. One way to get around that is to use remote tracking branches to do that. So I'll explain what a remote tracking branch is in a second, but if you do git branch list remote, you don't have to have the list, I just like it for semantics, but if you do this, will see a list of remote branches, and I only have one right now because this remote repository only has one branch, but if you were in an existing project and you had lots of remote repositories configured and lots of branches, you would see maybe like my remote slash master, my remote slash feature branch, my remote slash hotfix, some other repos slash something. They all take the form of remote slash branch. So if you do this command, you'll see them. And these branches are called remote tracking branches, and they're kind of special creatures in the Git universe. They're essentially pointers to the true remote branches. So this isn't the remote branch right here on my left on GitHub. It's a pointer to it, a reference. This is kind of reminiscent of the classic pass by reference versus pass by value dichotomy in computer science. Sometimes when you try to do things to a reference and you think it's a value, weird things can happen. Attempting to check out one of these remote tracking branches is one such weird thing, and I want to demonstrate that, so let me git checkout my remote slash master. And you can see that it kind of gives us this message, you are in a detached head state. If I do git status, it'll reinforce that. And so the reason I'm doing this is because I wanted to get a local copy of my remote's master branch, but I didn't want it configured to track. I wanted to avoid that automatic behavior. And you can see that I have a local copy. Readme.md is here, and if we look at its contents, they match what's in the remote. Let me look at the raw, and yeah, you can see it's the same thing. So let me clear that out. So we have a local copy, but one small detail is that you can't really directly interact with this remote tracking branch, this pointer to the true branch. It's not meant to be used that way. It's meant to be used as a mediator between your local branch and the remote branch. So if you try to do any commits on this branch, they won't persist. You'll create like a new floating branch to house your new changes, but the pointer itself will be unaffected. I won't go into showing that, but it's a detail to keep in mind. So we can't use this directly, but because we have the contents of the remote master, which is what we want, we can create a new branch from this and just use that one instead of using this kind of special remote tracking branch that is kind of finicky. So to do that, let's get branch local master. So we created a new local branch called local master from this branch's contents, and then we're going to check out local master. And like I said, readme.md is here like it is here, so we do have matching contents. And just to be even clearer on that, let me do git log one line, and you can see the same commit hash on the remote as here, so we're good to go. Oh, so I want to illustrate that this isn't tracking the remote one, so because that was the whole goal and why I didn't just do git checkout master. So to illustrate that this isn't tracking, I'm going to do git status, and you don't see any message like up to date with my remote master. If that's not enough proof, I can do this. I can show the config file in the .git directory, and there, if local master were tracking something or anything, there would be a record and for it, like you can see there's a record for core, a record for my remote, the remote repo. If local master were configured to track something, there would be a record for it, and you would see information for tracking purposes in that record. There isn't any tracking information, and there isn't even a record for local master, so you can trust me when I say that it's not tracking the remote repository right here, or the remote branch master right here. So get out of there. We can also try and do a git push for further confirmation that this isn't tracking anything. And it's going to say that there's no configured push destination, so there you go. It's not connected yet. So now that we know that, let's try to do that. Let's try to connect it. We're going to do git branch set upstream to my remote /master. And it says branch local master set up to track remote branch master from my remote. And so now it is tracking. If we do git status, your branch is up to date with my remote /master, so that's a pretty clear message. And let me look at the git config, and like I said, if there were any tracking information, a record for the branch would be created, and the tracking information would be under that record. You can see that a record was created for branch local master, and you can see the remote field was set to my remote, and the merge field was set to the master branch. And these two fields dictate what the upstream branch of local master is. So the upstream of local master is my remote /master, like I said, and like how it is shown in git status. Okay, so now that it's configured to track, we should be able to do a git push right now, right? Well, let's try it out. First, let's create a new commit. So I'll do file1.txt to create that. Git add file1.txt, and we're going to commit it. Okay, so we created the commit, and now let's try pushing it. It's configured to track it, so it should work. but it doesn't. It says the upstream branch of your current branch does not match the name of your current branch. To push the upstream branch on the remote, use git push my remote head :master. So Git's telling us that our local branch's name doesn't match the upstream branch's name. So we have to specify 3 fields: the remote repository to push to, the local source branch, and the remote target branch. So let's just try doing that. Git push my remote, and I could say head, but I'm just going to do local master just for clarity. And it looks like whatever operation it did was successful. Let's see if it's the operation I had in mind. And it worked. It pushed the commit up to the branch it was set to track to. So now that we know how to do that, it's, we can push to branches of different names. You could just change those names around in the local source branch and remote target branch fields. But anyway, this isn't ideal. If we try to do git push, it tells us that we have to do this verbose way, and our goal was to have git push, but without any arguments or anything, have a default behavior where it just pushed to the repository without needing anything, so that the default behavior would be intuitive. We don't want to do this verbose command every single time. So how are we going to get that behavior? Well, we need to discuss a Git configuration called push default. There are many Git config fields. To see them all, let's do git config list, and it will show you all the configurations that are active in this project. A lot of these are inherited from the global git config, which if you wanted to see, you could do git config global list. But let's just look at the local one. And you can see there's a field called push default. And this handles the default behavior of git push, as the name implies. And it's set to simple. Oh, so what does the simple value mean? Well, with simple, if you do a git push without any arguments or options, Git will look on the configured remote repository for a kind of corresponding branch of the same name. So it's going to look on the configured remote for a branch that has the same name as your local current branch. And then it's going to try to push your changes on that matching branch. So this is why we ran into our issue earlier about naming. Git complained that the upstream branch's name didn't match our local branch's name. And I kind of knew that was going to happen. Again, I deliberately named our local branch local master and not master exactly, so that we could encounter this issue. Had I named our local branch just master, it would match the remote repository's branch master in naming. This one's named master and this one's named master. And because of the push default equals simple setting, it would have worked. But we are trying to learn a thing or two about Git, so I kind of push us away from that nice default setting. But what we can do is we can change the default behavior of git push. We can change push.default to a different value. We can change it to upstream. Okay, so what does upstream do? Upstream makes it so the default behavior of git push is that it will push to the configured upstream branch, the branch that that your local branch is tracking. And this is more flexible than simple because it lets you push to any upstream branch that you configure to, but it might be a little dangerous for beginners, and so that might be why the default behavior is simple and not just upstream. So now that we changed the default behavior of git push to upstream, let's see if our goal is met. If git push on its own will push to this upstream branch. So let's create a new file, and like before, we going to commit it. Okay, and the moment of truth, let's see if git push on its own with no options or arguments will push to the configured upstream branch. Hooray! Well, I think it worked. Let's see. And it worked. Cool. So that was kind of a lot of work, but at least we got it to work in the end. But we're still not done. We want to try the other way around. Let's make a change on the remote upstream branch and see if a git pull without anything will work as intended. So I'm going to create file3.txt right in our remote repository. And then we're going to go back to the local one and do a git pull and see if this will work on its own. And it looks like it did. We have file 3 here. And so, awesome. So now we have git pull and git push working as intended. They both work kind of like how it worked when we get cloned. They both work without any arguments or options, and they both pull and push from the proper places, what you would kind of expect intuitively. So that's the end of the video. I hope that you learned a few git commands and configurations you didn't know before. Maybe you have an idea now of how to push and pull from different branches. And I hope that you have a better appreciation of some of the defaults that Git chooses to provide for a more intuitive experience. So yeah, I hope you have a good day.